And it's been on the local news, every channel, pretty much since this poor child went missing. And so it is something that the public is deeply concerned about.
What begins as summer fun ends in tragedy when a 12-year-old girl sneaks out of her Texas home only to be found murdered hours later. Now, investigators say 2 illegal immigrants are behind the vicious attack, stripping the young girl naked and strangling her to death.
Capital murder is in Texas as serious as it gets. So you're looking at the most egregious punishment range possible.
What's still unclear, why the girl had to die.
You know, sometimes things don't have any reason at all, and it could simply be a crime of opportunity.
Her family now speaking out about the young life lost.
She had such a bright future ahead of her, and I knew she was going to go very far. And, these monsters took that opportunity from her.
We're taking a closer look at the facts as we know them right now and what we could expect to see as the case moves forward.
So there is definitely a very long road ahead with this case, just because there's going to be so much data, so much discovery, so much forensic information.
The story begins on Sunday, June 16th in Houston, Texas. At about 10 o'clock that evening, 12-year-old Jocelyn Nungarays snuck out of her home. Just hours later, at about 6:15 a.m. on June 17th, her body was found in a shallow creek. To understand the case as we know it right now, I sat down with former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney Nicole DeBoard.
I'm here in Houston, and so Harris County is the county that covers Houston, and it's been on the local news, every channel, pretty much since this poor child went missing. And so it is something that the public is deeply concerned about.
If we're going back way to the beginning and the early stages of the investigation before any suspects are even arrested, we know that we have this little 12-year-old girl who went missing. Her boyfriend was on the phone with her, and that's the last anyone heard from her. So when we're starting an investigation like that, searching for her, what would all of that look like?
So there are teams of people that go out and volunteer to look for missing people. And in this circumstance, that's exactly what happened. And they were able to unfortunately find her near her home, and were able to use that location to track back for all sorts of video footage, which ultimately linked them up to the suspects they now have under arrest.
At a press conference days after Jocelyn's murder, Houston police officials made this announcement.
We were able to find video and trace the movements of our suspects and of Jocelyn, and all the way to the point of where she was murdered and left in a bayou in the water.
Houston investigators used security video to piece together a rough timeline of the evening. They say 2 male suspects were first seen together at a restaurant.
That the suspects began their evening at a Northborough area restaurant together. They left that restaurant on foot, southbound. The suspects continued south and were first seen on a camera.
The next time they were on camera, the 2 men were with Jocelyn.
Suspects seen meeting the victim and talking for a few minutes while they were on Kirkendall. Later, the suspects and the victim walked together to a convenience store.
From the convenience store, all 3 made their way toward what would become the crime scene.
After a few minutes, all 3 together walked to a bridge where ultimately Jocelyn was murdered.
The next time security footage picked up the suspects, they were alone without Jocelyn.
Suspects continued south towards their residence after leaving Jocelyn there.
Investigators say everything happened in only a matter of hours from the point the suspects met up with Jocelyn until she was murdered.
So it was in the evening of the 16th that they left that restaurant. It was during the nighttime, midnight hour almost, that they were walking. And we believe that it wasn't until shortly after 1 to 2 o'clock that they were at the bridge. So it was within a span of 3-4 hours.
In the early morning hours of June 17th, a woman found Jocelyn's body in a shallow creek. Someone was unfortunately on their morning commute and noticed this little girl's body there. So when investigators are zeroing in on this, the crime scene where the body is found, what sort of evidence are they gathering here? Because a lot of this is going to be really invaluable when they move forward to trial.
Sure, they're looking for any kind of physical evidence that they can capture, and it's very difficult when someone is outside, because things move around. The weather can affect what evidence is still available on a scene. It depends on how long the person has been at the location and whether or not there's been interference with the deceased person. Unfortunately, those things can all impact what kinds of physical evidence can be gathered. But certainly, if the police could get everything that they're hoping to get, they're looking for things that may involve fingerprints on items. I understand that she may have been tied up. It depends on what she was tied up with. Could there be DNA on these items? Could there be DNA on the little girl? These are all things that the police will be doing everything they can to try to capture the scene exactly as it was found, so that it's not disturbed or contaminated, so that they can gather as much physical information as possible from the scene.
In the hours after Jocelyn's murder, investigators released images of the suspects from security camera video, asking the public to help identify them. And surveillance video is really a big deal in this case because that's how they narrowed in on a timeline, at least as of now, and a couple of suspects. So investigators were able to look through this security cam footage from, I believe, a restaurant and then also a convenience store. And they noticed these two men. Those are people of interest, just to begin. So how do investigators go about seeing these two men on the security tape and then tracking down their whereabouts?
So once they have determined that this victim was in contact with these two adults, they're able to go back and then use the same video tracking theories to track the adults, and which they did. It appears in this case there may have been some other data that's possible that they used cell phone location data if they were carrying cell phones. So we don't know yet the extent of what kinds of information were used to track them, but at a minimum, once they captured images of these two talking with the victim, they would certainly then use the same methods they employed to try to find her, to try to find out where they went. And likely that will be a big piece of what we later hear about in this trial.
As some detectives zeroed in on the security footage, others spoke with a witness of sorts. Jocelyn's 13-year-old boyfriend told officials he was on the phone with her when she was in the convenience store and overheard some of her conversation. So we have her boyfriend who told investigators, yeah, I heard her on the phone. She was talking to these guys. What would all of that mean in terms of that information coming in as evidence? I'm looking way ahead to down to a trial. Could this little boy who's only 13 be put on the stand and asked to repeat what he overheard?
Certainly he could be, and his cell phone records, her cell phone records, any text exchanges. There are going to be videos that they have captured, the police have captured from businesses in the area, that they will likely line up with the timing of those calls and text messages to verify what the other little boy is saying. There may be video of her leaving ultimately her apartment where she lived. As we have heard, unfortunately, she snuck out. Or it sounds like she may have snuck out. And so then, where did she go? What did she do? I think that the police are going to be looking for every shred of information to track her exact location and to put a timestamp on that location and then ultimately use that in evidence.
Investigators quickly identified the men caught on the security video as 21-year-old Johan Jose Rangel Martinez and 26-year-old Franklin Jose Peña Ramos. At first, they're brought in for questioning, so we have enough just to question them and ask them about where they were and things like that. But all of a sudden, we have enough evidence to charge them. So what kind of evidence could that be?
It's hard to guess exactly what it is that they may have learned during the interview of these two suspects. It's also possible that when the police bring them in for questioning, that they actually had sufficient information for an arrest. We don't know really exactly at this point just how much information they had to support either probable cause or reasonable suspicion or the various legal standards that would be required for each of the stages where they might be able to interview somebody or detain them or actually arrest them for the crime itself. So I think that it's possible that we have new information based on what these individuals said to police. It's possible that they had physical evidence of some kind on them. But it's also possible that the police had enough information to actually make the arrests at the time that they brought these individuals in to visit with them.
Both men now face the most severe charge possible.
The suspects are now facing charges of capital murder, one being Johan Jose Rangel Martinez. the second male being Franklin Jose Peña Ramos.
And ultimately, these two were charged with capital murder of a child between ages 10 and 15 because the victim in this case is 12. And that little disclaimer at the end, ages 10 to 15, is really what stood out to me. Does that put it almost in a different category rather than if an adult had been murdered?
So in Texas, capital murder, if there's an adult murder, but there are not other circumstances present, it may not rise to the level of being a capital murder. Capital murder in Texas usually requires, and it depends on the age of the victim. And in this case, it was a child, which makes it fall into the capital murder category. But if it's an adult, I say just a murder, which is obviously the most horrific crime. It may not be a capital murder. And so you have different punishment ranges for different types of murders. So a murder in Texas that is not attached to, say, a robbery or to a sexual assault, those cases are prosecuted under a different punishment scheme and under a different statute. But because in this case, the complainant, the decedent, is a child, then what we're dealing with based on the statute is the capital murder statute, of course, which has a different punishment range.
Let's pause for a quick second to thank Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring today's Law and Crime News Package. It's stories like this that remind you you never know what's going to happen and the world can be an unpredictable place. So when you're hurt, it can be confusing and scary and you don't know where to turn. Well, enter Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. You can submit a claim in 8 clicks or less on your phone and find out if you have a case. If you do, your injury could be worth millions. So if you've ever been injured in an accident, you can start your claim at forthepeople.com/LCnews. According to the Harris County District Attorney's Office, when investigators found Jocelyn's body, she'd been stripped naked. At a press conference on Monday, Harris County District Attorney Kim Ogg told reporters, if tests show Jocelyn was sexually assaulted, the suspects could face the death penalty.
So we'll look forward to the results of the tests that are being run on the evidence in the case. And should those tests produce evidence that would support a charge of sexual assault, or should other evidence be brought forward that supports a charge of kidnapping, both underlying offenses would make this capital murder and these individuals death penalty eligible.
Newly released court documents show the suspects allegedly assaulted the girl for 2 hours before she was strangled to death.
Make no mistake, this is a horrific crime. And when we take charges, we do it based on the evidence we have at the moment. As soon as our lab results are back, and if they support a death penalty eligible type of capital murder, then we'll come back and ask for no bond.
On Monday, Peña Ramos made his first appearance since being charged. A Harris County judge set his bond at $10 million. But this isn't the first time he or the other suspect have been arrested. According to the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, both men, quote, illegally entered the U.S. without inspection, parole, or admission by a U.S. immigration officer on an unknown date and at an unknown location. Martinez Rangel was arrested on March 14th, and Peña Ramos was arrested on May 28th. Both men were arrested near El Paso, Texas, and originally from Venezuela. Another aspect of this case is that there were several immigration violations by both of the defendants. They had been arrested, one in March and then one in May, so just in the weeks leading up to this murder. What do you make of all of that? Could any of that factor into the case?
It absolutely will. So in Texas, which a lot of people find surprising unless the death penalty is on the table, a person is absolutely entitled to bond in a case. It doesn't have to be a low bond, but they're entitled to bond for a charge that doesn't involve the death penalty. And in this circumstance, you can imagine that the court will want to set a very high bond. But when you have an immigration issue on the side, these suspects, in other words, are thought to have violated immigration laws, even with a bond, even if these suspects were able to make the bond that the judge is forced by law to have to set. Again, it will likely be very high. they probably would not be released anyway because they would have what we call an immigration hold, or they would be forced to remain in custody as the case is pending, because immigration also will want to ensure that these individuals do not leave to where they cannot be found and then answer to the court for these crimes.
I guess that immigration aspect of it also leads into another question about extradition. Is it possible that after all of this, they're sent back to their country of origin?
It's possible that they could be, but in Texas, typically what happens, and certainly there's nothing typical about this case. It's again, the facts are just absolutely horrific. A person would, if convicted, serve their entire sentence before being removed. Right? We now call what we used to call deportation, removal, and a person is sentenced in a case for which they're convicted, could serve a case involving a capital murder, an automatic life sentence without parole. And so therefore would probably never come to the point where they would be deported or removed, potentially, since they would be serving a life sentence. But the sentence is completed before removal in many cases.
But there's still a few lingering questions. Why did this happen, and could it have been avoided? And I think the question on everyone's mind right now is motive, because we have these two men in their early 20s who end up with a victim who's only 12. And according to the girl's mother, she did not recognize these two men. She believes her daughter had never seen them before. So what would a motive be in a killing like this? A crime of passion or a crime of opportunity?
Sometimes things don't have any reason at all. And it could simply be, as you've put it, a crime of opportunity. There could be more to it. We just don't know. We don't have any reason to believe, based on at least what's been put out into the public and been put, out by family members, that this little girl knew her attackers, if these are the right suspects at all. And so there's no link that anyone is reporting, no known communication between this child and these two suspects. So, we will likely hear, as the case progresses, as evidence comes out in court, maybe if there was some sort of contact between these individuals. But right now, we just don't have that information.
Is it possible that had she not snuck out of her home, she would still be alive?
Certainly that is the conjecture. I mean, it's just devastating. You have a kid that probably just wants to do mischievous kid things, maybe even just simply talk on the phone after her phone curfew is over with a boyfriend who's her age. We don't know at this point exactly what the details are, but the local reporting on the case has indicated, according to the mother and things that she's told the public and told the media, is that she snuck out. And, certainly we don't have all the details. That's what the courtroom is ultimately for, the facts and the data that we are all eager to hear later. But right now, it does appear that she was out of her home at a time when her mom didn't expect her to be.
At a press conference on Monday, we heard from Jocelyn's mother, Jocelyn Nungarays.
She was amazing. I still see her face in the back of my head every day, all day. Keep getting little signs about her throughout the days, and it's just been a very, very hard time for me and my family. She had such a bright future ahead of her, and I knew she was gonna go very far. And these monsters took that opportunity from her, from our family, of watching her. I just want people to remember, I know this is a very high profile case, but she was still my firstborn. I was a teen mom. I fought for her at 15. So 27 now, I'm still fighting for her. And just remember that she was a very special little girl that deserves her justice. And I know she's gonna make a difference in this world for all children, and now it's my job to make sure it continues to happen. So I just want to say thank you.
Moving forward, DeBoer doesn't expect any more charges for the suspects, but does believe the death penalty will strongly be considered.
It's likely that they won't face additional charges, only because capital murder is in Texas as serious as it gets. So you're looking at the most egregious punishment range possible. And so to charge additional cases would be unusual just because it does not help the prosecutors in any way. Now, that doesn't mean that these crimes won't be discussed in court. You know, every circumstance that led up to ultimately this child's death could be potentially relevant in the trial for the capital murder. So if there was a sexual assault, that is something that the prosecution can absolutely get in front of this jury because it would be part of what happened on the night that this child died. So it's not necessary for them to charge these suspects with that, even if they are going to, you know, ultimately blame them for the conduct in court.
And if the cases do head to trial, DeBoard expects the pair to be tried separately. Also, right now, I've seen that they're listed as co-defendants. Is there a pro or con list that prosecutors are going through, whether they should be tried together, tried separately? How would that work?
In state court in Texas, it is often unusual for defendants to be tried together because even though you see in many places, including federal court, oftentimes many co-defendants are tried during the same trial at the same time. The standards in Texas are a little bit different. The courts are very cautious, which really is a good thing. You want each person who is accused to be tried for their own conduct, their own involvement, not whatever lengthy criminal record your co-defendant might have, whatever other personal problems your co-defendant might have. You want to make sure that the person who's actually on trial is being tried for who they are and what they've done and not what somebody else may have done or who they were hanging around with. And so it's likely that even though they're co-defendants, that these trials will be had not at the same time, but one after the other.
Both suspects made their initial court appearances this week. The district attorney asked for $1 million bond for each of them, but instead, the judge imposed a $10 million bond for each suspect, deeming them both flight risks. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.